Picture a man so tall that when he walks through a doorway he folds himself like a carpenter's rule. Now take away the shoulders you're imagining. Give him narrow shoulders, sloping, almost a boy's shoulders, set on a body over 2 meters high. Give him a head that's too small for that height, small enough that people who met him wrote it down in private letters because they couldn't stop thinking about it. Give him feet that are small too, absurdly small for such a frame, so that he seems always about to tip over like a pine tree balanced on its point. Give him hands that are enormous, hard as ship timber, scarred with tar and rope burn. And now give his face a tic, a convulsion that seizes the left side of it without warning, pulling the mouth sideways, rolling the eye, jerking the whole head down toward the shoulder, sometimes taking the arm with it, sometimes the whole body, in front of ambassadors, in front of dinner guests, in front of terrified serving girls, and nobody's allowed to notice. That is Peter I, Tsar of all Russia, the man the portraits show you standing calm and broad-shouldered and perfectly proportioned in armour he barely wore, with a face as smooth and still as a coin. The portraits lied, every one of them. But there were people who saw the real man, who stood close enough to smell the tobacco and the brandy and the tar on him, who watched the tick take his face at a supper table and learned to keep eating, who worked beside him with an adze in a Dutch shipyard while he pretended badly to be an ordinary carpenter named Pyotr Mikhailov. Some of them were princesses and bishops who wrote it all down, and some of them were nobody at all, apprentice boys with splinters in their palms who saw more of the true Tsar in 4 months than his own court painters ever chose to see. Tonight, you're one of those boys. We're going back to Holland, to the autumn of 1697, to the sawdust and the tar smoke and the freezing green water of the Zarn and the IJ. Not to read about Peter the Great, to stand close enough to him that when the convulsion takes his face, you don't know whether to look away or hold still, and getting it wrong could cost you everything. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I have no idea if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just lying in the dark thinking about a 7-foot emperor with a facial tick hammering treenails into a frigate. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. The adze is taken out of your hands before you even hear him coming. That's the first thing. Not a greeting. Not a shadow falling over the timber. Just 2 enormous hands closing over yours from behind, lifting the adze away as easily as taking a spoon from a child, and a voice above your head, far above your head, saying something in a language you don't know, harsh and fast, and then in broken Dutch, thick as porridge. Wrong. You cut wrong. Watch. You're 16 years old. You've been an apprentice at the Rogyard in Zandam for 3 years. You know how to cut a scarf joint. You've cut hundreds of them. And you're about to argue because your master Linst Rogger is 20 paces away and this is your timber and your adze, when you turn around and your argument dies somewhere in your throat. You're looking at a man's chest. At the level where a man's face should be, there's a rough green woolen jacket, the kind every Zandam carpenter wears, buttoned wrong. You look up and up, past a red neckcloth knotted like a sailor's, past a throat with a pulse hammering in it, to a face very far away, dark-eyed, round-cheeked, with a small moustache and brown hair curling out from under a battered felt hat, and the face is looking down at you with an expression you will spend months learning to read. Hunger, not for food, for the work itself. He is the tallest human being you have ever seen. Not the tallest by a little, The tallest, the way the church tower is the tallest thing in Zandam. 2 meters and 3 centimeters, though you don't know the number yet, and neither does he, probably, and it wouldn't matter. What matters is what your eyes do next. Without your permission, the same thing everyone's eyes do. They slide from that impossible height to the shoulders and stop, confused. Because the shoulders are narrow, sloped. The shoulders of a clerk, of a boy, set on the frame of a giant, and the head above them is small. You can't explain why it unsettles you. It just does. It's like looking at a ship with too little beam, a hull that shouldn't float but does, cutting the water faster than anything around it. He sets the adze to your timber. His grip is wrong by every rule your master taught you, choked too high, and then he swings, and the blade takes off a curl of oak so long and so clean that it drops over his wrist like a ribbon, and you understand that the rules were made for men with ordinary arms. Now you, he says. You take the adze back. Your hands are shaking slightly. The handle is warm where he held it, and slick, because his palms sweat. You'll learn that too. His palms sweat constantly, in any weather. You set your feet. You cut. The curl comes off shorter than his, ragged at the end. He watches. And then the left side of his face moves. It's fast, faster than a blink. The corner of his mouth wrenches sideways and up toward his ear. The eye above it rolls white for half a heartbeat, and his head snaps down and left as if someone invisible has struck him across the cheek. His narrow shoulders hunch. His right hand, the huge right hand, flies up halfway toward his own face and stops in the air, fingers spread, and then it's over. The face settles, the hand comes down. He's looking at you again as if nothing happened at all. You have not moved. You don't know why you have not moved. Some animal part of you decided in that half second that moving would be dangerous, the way you go still when a dog you don't know looks at you. Later, you will understand you made the single most important decision of your young life in that half second, and you made it by accident. Better, he says, nodding at your cut. Again tomorrow. And he walks away down the yard, ducking under a beam that every other man walks beneath upright, his small feet quick and light on the mud. And you stand there with the adze in your 2 hands, breathing sawdust, and the sawyer's boy next to you whispers, "Do you know who that is?" You don't. Not yet. It is the 20th of August, 1697. The water in the Zaan is green and cold and smells of tar and eelgrass, and you've just been given a carpentry lesson by the Tsar of Russia. Your name is Jan Verhoef. You should know that about yourself before this goes any further, because for the next 4 months, who you are, exactly, how small, how unimportant, how easy to replace, is going to matter more than anything. You are the second son of a hemp beater. Your father works in one of the windmills upriver, the ones that pound hemp for rope all day so that the whole district thumps like a heart. And your older brother will have the mill place after him, which is why you were bound apprentice to Linst-Rogger, shipwright, when you were 13. You sleep in the loft above the mould shed with 2 other apprentices on straw mattresses that smell of boys and tar. You own 2 shirts, 1 pair of boots, a wooden chest with a lock, a knife, and a Bible you can mostly read. Your hands, at 16, are already an old man's hands, cracked at the knuckles, hard across the palm as the sole of a shoe. There's a black splinter deep under your left thumbnail that's been there since spring and will still be there at Christmas. You know oak and you know pine and you know the difference blindfolded, by weight, by the sound the mallet makes, by the way the grain drags at a blade. You know that green oak fights you and seasoned oak forgives you. You know that a treenail driven crooked will weep salt water for the life of the ship, and that the man who drove it will never be caught, and that God sees it anyway, which is what your master says instead of goodbye most evenings. And you know Zaandam. Everyone in Europe knows Zaandam, though you don't know that they know. This one stretch of riverbank builds more ships faster and cheaper than anywhere on earth. 50 shipyards, hundreds of windmills sawing timber day and night, so that a merchant can order a fleet in spring and sail her by autumn. The whole town smells of fresh-cut wood and hot tar, and the smoke of the paint boilers, and the sound of it, the sound you've slept inside your entire life, is hammering. Thousands of mallets, from first light to dark, out of rhythm with each other, like rain on a roof. People come from everywhere to learn how it's done here. Danes, Swedes, even Russians lately, quiet bearded men who work hard and drink harder. So when a new Russian appears at the Rolga yard, a very tall one calling himself Pyotr Mikhailov, carpenter, nobody should care. The whole town cares within a day, because the story is already running up and down the dike faster than a dog. Gerrit Kist, the blacksmith who worked years in Moscow, was fishing for eels on Sunday when a boat full of Russians hailed him from the water, and one of them, the huge one, called him by name. And Kist nearly went into the river, because he knew that face. He had seen it in Moscow, above a fur collar, in front of kneeling crowds, and the huge man put a finger to his lips, actually put a finger to his lips like a boy stealing apples, and asked to rent Kist's house. Kist's house. A wooden cottage behind the dike, 2 cramped rooms, a box bed built into the wall that this man cannot possibly fit inside, a brick stove, a view of nothing. The widow living in it was paid to move out in an afternoon, and now the Tsar of Muscovy, autocrat of the largest empire in the world, a man who owns more land than the Pope, the Emperor and the King of France put together, is sleeping folded up like a pocket knife in a box bed behind the Zaandam dike, buying his own bread, mending his own stockings, and coming to the yards at dawn asking for work. You will not look at him, your master tells you, and the other apprentices that first evening, in the mould shed, by lantern light. Lindstroger is a careful man, grey as driftwood, and you have never heard his voice do what it's doing now, which is shake, very slightly. You will not speak of him at home. You will not point him out to anyone. If he tells you to do a thing, you do it, and you call him nothing but his name, Pyotr Mikhailov, carpenter. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You all nod. No, he says, you don't. So hear me. That man's own people, his soldiers, his lords, his priests are not permitted to look him in the face without leave. Men have been broken for less than a wrong word. He has come here to be an ordinary man for a while. God alone knows why, and the kindest and the safest thing anyone in this town can do for him, and for ourselves, is to let him be one. The first fool who bows to him in my yard is finished here. Now go to bed. You lie awake a long time that night, listening to your loft mates breathe, listening to the last late mallets across the water. You keep seeing the face, not the height, the face and the thing that happened to it. The wrench of the mouth, the white of the eye, the head snapping down as if struck. You have seen fits before. There's a boy in the fish market who falls down foaming on bad days, and the women hold his head so he doesn't crack it on the stones. But this wasn't that. This was smaller and stranger. A storm that lasted half a second, and then pretended it had never been weather at all. You wonder if it hurt him. You wonder if anyone has ever asked him. You fall asleep before you can wonder anything else, because you are 16 and you've been swinging steel since 5 in the morning, and tomorrow, he said again tomorrow, the Tsar of Russia is expecting you at the timber. He is there before you. That is the thing nobody tells you about emperors. This one rises earlier than apprentices. When you come down the loft ladder at first light, grey light, gull light, with the fog still lying on the Zarn like spilled milk, he is already in the yard in his green jacket and his tarred canvas breeches, sorting through the timber stack, thumping each bulk of oak with the heel of his hand and putting his ear to it as if the wood might speak, which is what you do, what your master taught you to do. Sound timber rings, shaken timber answers dull. Somebody has taught this man properly, somewhere, and he has actually listened, which you will come to understand is the rarest thing about him, rarer than the height. Great men are told things all their lives. This one hears them. You, he says without turning around. Jan. He has learned your name. Your stomach does something complicated. This one. He slaps a bulk. Sound? You put your ear where his was. The wood is cold and wet with fog against your cheek. You knock with your knuckle. Listen to the tone run away down the grain, clean, ringing like a far-off bell. Sound. This? The next bulk. You listen. There it is. The deadness. A note that stops instead of travelling. The sound of a shake hidden somewhere deep in the heart of the tree. A split that will open one day under strain. In weather. At sea. With men's lives stacked on top of it. Bad, you say. Shaken. Somewhere in the middle. He straightens up to his full impossible height and looks down at you, and the dark eyes are shining. Actually shining. Like a boy who has been shown a magic trick. Yes, he says. Yes. How? How you know? Not from outside. Outside is same. And so you tell him. Standing in the fog with your breath smoking, 16 years old, you explain to the ruler of Russia how sound moves through oak in your small Dutch words and his smaller ones, drawing the grain in the air with your cracked hands, and he leans down over you with his hands on his knees to bring his faraway head close to yours, and he smells of last night's brandy and this morning's pipe, and under both of those the smell that never leaves him, tar and sweat. And when you finish, he says the word he says 100 times a day, the word half of Zaandam is already imitating behind his back. Good. Good. And then the tick takes him. Closer this time. You're an arm's length from his face when the left side of it convulses, mouth hauled sideways, eyelid hammering the head, jerking down toward that hunched narrow shoulder. Once, twice, and this close you can hear it. That's the thing nobody could have told you. There is a sound, a small wet click of teeth as his jaw snaps, and a breath forced out through his nose. This close you can see that it isn't like the fish market boy at all. His eyes stay awake inside it. That's the terrible part. Somewhere behind the rolling eye and the wrenched cheek, he's still in there, waiting for his own face to be given back to him. 2 heartbeats. 3. Then it lets him go. The way a gust lets go of a sail, all at once, and the face settles, and he carries on speaking as if the sentence had never been interrupted. And this bad one, we cut, we find the shake, you show me where, and he picks up the 12-foot bulk of oak alone, a 2-man lift, tucks it under one arm against the narrow shoulder, and walks it to the trestles with those quick small feet, leaving you to trot after him carrying nothing but the saw and the beginning of an understanding. You are not to notice. Nothing about him is to be noticed. Not the height everyone stares at, not the face that betrays him a dozen times a day, not the hands that shake ever so slightly when he holds a pen, though they are dead steady on an axe. You are to work. Work is the country where he is not a monster and not a god. Work is the only place the man gets to live. You can do that. You have been doing that your whole life. By the third day, the crowds begin. It starts small. A few more faces than usual at the yard gate. Women with market baskets who have found reasons to walk the long way. A boat that drifts past on the Zaan very slowly, oars barely dipping, every head aboard turned one direction. Your master sends an apprentice to shut the gate. The faces look through the fence. By the fifth day it is not small. The word is out of Zaandam and running loose in Holland. The Tsar of Muscovy is living in a wooden hut behind the dike and planing timber like a wage man. Nobody believes it, so everybody comes to see it. They come from Amsterdam by barge, packed rail to rail. They come from Haarlem and Alkmaar in wagons. They stand on the dike in their hundreds, in their Sunday clothes on working days, staring into the yard, and when the tall figure crosses it, they make a sound all together, a low, hungry murmur. Ooh, the sound a crowd makes at fireworks, and the figure hunches those narrow shoulders up around the small head and turns his back. You watch it change him hour by hour. The hunger in his face when he works, that boy's shine, it gutters like a candle in a draught every time the murmur comes. He starts working with his back to the fence. He starts wearing a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, which is like a church tower wearing a hat. He cannot make himself small. It is the one thing on earth his will cannot do, and you begin to understand, watching him, that his whole life has been this, everyone always looking, and that he crossed Europe under a false name not to see Holland but to stop being seen. And it has followed him here. It will follow him everywhere, forever. And he knows it now. You can see him knowing it, and it makes him dangerous the way weather gets dangerous. A stillness with pressure inside. Sunday breaks it. He tries to walk out like a person. That's all. It's the day of rest. The yards are silent for once. The whole town smelling of psalm singing and stewed eel, and he sets out from Kist Cottage along the dike to look at the windmills, because he has been asking about the wind-driven sawmills all week, how the crank turns the up and down of the saws. He wants to see inside one. 4 of his Russians walk with him. Within 100 paces there are 50 Zaandamers behind him. Within 300 there are 200, and boys are running ahead down the side paths to fetch more, and the crowd is no longer following. It is pressing. It wants to touch. It wants him to do something Tsar-like. And the boldest of the boys, town boys, the kind who throw stones at everything, at gulls, at ice, at each other, begin to throw things at him. Grass clods, small green apples hard as musket balls. One strikes him. You're on the dike. You see it. You will be asked about it for the rest of your life, and you will always say the same thing. You saw the plum or the apple or whatever it was strike that small head, and you saw the head turn, and even at 40 paces you saw the face do its terrible trick. The full convulsion this time, the head and neck and shoulder and arm all seized together, wrenching him half around, and the crowd's murmur died into total silence, because they all thought, that they were watching rage, that the Tsar of Muscovy was about to fall on them like the wrath of God. And what he actually did was flee. There is no other honest word. The tallest man in Europe turned and went back along the dike with those quick small feet, faster than the crowd could decently follow, his Russians closing behind him like a door, and he shut himself in a 2-room cottage, and the whole of Zaandam stood outside it until dark, staring at the shutters. The burgmasters posted guards on the dike the next morning, and published an order that anyone molesting distinguished persons who wished to remain unknown would answer for it. It did no good. You cannot post guards against eyes. Mundy came to the yard and worked 4 hours in a silence like held breath, spoiled 2 cuts, which he never did, threw the adze, not at anyone, into the mud, stood over it with the tick firing again and again, click, click, and then picked it up, cleaned the blade on his breeches with terrible care, handed it to you without a word, and walked to the water. 8 days. That is all Zaandam got of him in the end. On a gusting grey morning he stepped into the little sailboat he'd bought his second day here, paid for in coin on the spot because of course he had, and crossed to Amsterdam in weather that kept the ferry at its moorings, sailing the boat himself, heeled so far over that the dike crowd, one last crowd watching him go, groaned out loud, certain they were watching the Tsar of all Russia drown himself off Zaandam out of spite. He didn't drown. He never drowned all his life, though he tried the sea's patience more than any man alive. And 3 days later, a message comes to the Rogge Yard from Amsterdam, from the offices of the East India Company itself, and your master reads it twice, and then looks up over the paper at you with an expression you have never seen on his face before, and says, "Fetch your chest, Jan, you're lent." Lent, like a tool, like a good adze that a bigger yard is asked to borrow. The greatest trading company on earth has closed its Oostenburg shipyard to the public, cleared a work crew, and undertaken to lay down a new frigate from the keel up, so that the carpenter Pyotr Mikhailov may build a ship with his own hands, from the first timber to the last, in peace, behind walls, with guards on the gates. And the carpenter is asked, among the shipwrights and sawyers and mast-makers being gathered for the work, for a particular apprentice from Zaandam, the boy who knows what oak says when you knock on it. Your mother cries. Your father shakes your hand as if you are leaving for the Indies instead of Amsterdam, an hour away across the water. Your master gives you his second-best broad axe, which is like him giving you his second-best son, and says, "Drive nothing crooked." God sees it anyway. And you go down the Zarn on a timber barge in the rain, 16 years old, with your wooden chest and your father's oilskin, toward the biggest city you have ever seen, and the strangest employer any boy in Europe has, and you should be frightened, and you are. But underneath the fright there is something warmer, and it takes you half the passage to name it. He asked for you. Out of everyone. The man nobody's allowed to look at looked at you and saw something worth keeping. You stand in the rain the whole way, watching Amsterdam rise out of the water, a forest of masts thicker than any woodland in Holland, 10,000 of them, and behind the mast the towers, and everywhere the smell of the world's cargo, pepper, hides, and Baltic pine and smoke, and you hold the rail with your cracked hands and think, remember this, whatever else happens. Remember you were here. Oostenburg swallows you whole. You thought you knew shipyards. You knew a river bank with trestles. This is an island, an artificial island built by the company out of nothing, in a city that is itself built out of nothing, on drowned ground, on forests of pilings driven into mud, and the island is a machine for making the largest moving objects mankind has ever produced. Rope walks 1/4 of a mile long, so long that the far end vanishes in its own haze of hemp dust, where men walk backward all day spinning yarn until they have walked, your new mates tell you, the distance to Rome and back every year without leaving the building, storehouses 5 floors high, packed with sailcloth and iron and Norway masts and enough seasoned oak to build a town. A smithy with 20 fires that you can hear breathing from across the water. Huff, 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 like a beast in a stall. And the slipways where East Indiamen stand half-born, ribs open to the sky, so vast that the men crawling over them look like lice on a whale skeleton. They give you a bunk in a loft over the mould shed, which is at least familiar straw and boys and tar, except the boys are strangers with city voices, and the first night none of them will stop asking about him. Is it true about the hut? Is it true about the fit that takes his face? Is it true he can break a silver coin with his fingers, that he drinks a pint of brandy at a sitting, that he pulled a barber surgeon's bag open on the dyke at Zandam and drew a bystander's tooth on a wager? True, true, you don't know, probably. You learn quickly to say nothing, and they learn quickly to stop asking, and the one who decides it, oddly, is the oldest man in the loft, a mast-maker's mate of 60 called Evert with a beard like frayed cable, who says out of the dark, "Let the boy sleep and let the big man be. I served under captains all my life." That one up there, and you can hear him jerk his thumb toward Russia somehow, toward the east wall of the loft, is the first king I ever heard of who wanted to know how the work is done before he orders men to die doing it. Let him learn. All our lives may hang on it some day. Which is the sort of thing old men say, and you fall asleep thinking it is only loft talk, and it will turn out decades on to be the truest sentence anyone speaks to you all autumn. On the 9th of September, the keel is laid. You will keep the date the rest of your life, the way other men keep the dates of battles. 100-foot frigate to be called the Peter and Paul, and the company men have made a small ceremony of the first timber, a few words, wine, the master shipwright Gerrit Cleese-Poole standing by with his rule, and then the great keel piece is swayed onto the blocks, and the tallest carpenter stoops over it with a mallet and drives the first fastening himself, 3 blows, ringing across the closed and guarded yard, and when he straightens up, his face does its wrench, click, in front of the company directors in their black coats and white collars, and not one of them permits himself to see it, and he laughs at something Poole says, that sudden barking laugh you're learning, too loud, like everything about him too large and too sudden, and then he takes off his coat and works. And now, for 9 weeks, your life is this, and you would not trade it for any life in Holland. Dawn, the yard bell, and fog off the IJ, and the first 100 mallets. He is always already there. Always. You start to suspect he does not sleep like other men, in one piece, but in fragments, like a sailor, and you are right. He can sleep an hour in sawdust with his hat over his face, and rise as if from a full night. He works in the gang like a man of the gang. He carries timber. He steams planks, standing in the white roaring blast when the steam box is cracked open, snatching the scalding plank out bare-handed with the rest of you, walking it at a run to the frames, holding it screaming against the curve with his whole vast weight while the clamps go on. And his forearms, you see them when the sleeves are rolled, are burned the way plankmen's forearms are burned. Pink, shiny scald scars laid over old ones. The Tsar of Russia has plank scald scars. Think about that until it stops being strange. It never stops being strange. He drives treenails by the 100 and drives them true. He caulks, kneeling in the smell of hot pitch with the caulking mallet dinning in everyone's skulls, that maddening iron ring that lives in your back teeth an hour after the work stops. He learns the loft floor, where the ship's lines are drawn full size in chalk on black planking, and the drawing of ships seizes him even harder than the building. He will stand on the loft floor at dusk with a candle, alone, walking the chalk curves heel to toe like a boy walking a fence muttering in Russian, and the loft master lets him, and posts you at the ladder head with the sand bucket, because candles and lofts and tar do not love each other. And that is how you come to spend evenings 10 paces from him, silent, invisible, watching the largest man in Europe walk along the belly line of an unborn ship in a circle of candlelight with his lips moving. And you watch. God forgive you, you are told not to notice, and you notice everything, because you are 16 and he is the strangest and most alive thing that will ever cross your world. You notice that everything they whisper about his body is true and stranger than the whispers. 2 full heads taller than tall men. Yet in the bathhouse the Russians rigged by the water, when the crew steams together as Russians must, you see that the whispers about the rest are true too. The shoulders narrow as your own, sloping from that short neck, the chest long but shallow, the head genuinely small so that from behind at distance in fog he looks like a normal man seen too close. The feet, when the boots are off, small as a woman's, size for size, absurd under 2 meters of man, so that you cannot understand how he doesn't blow over. And the answer is that he moves too fast to fall. He walks the way other men trot, with those quick little steps, and grown men of the yard, hard men, trot at his side like children beside a father to hold his pace, and everyone pretends this is normal. You notice the hands shake, at rest only, a fine tremor like a wire humming. Give them a tool and they go still as stone. You notice that he cannot bear to sit long. At the yard dinner table he is up before the meal ends, always pacing, picking things up, a chisel, a bread knife, someone's pipe, turning them over, that he eats like a working man, plain and huge, rye bread, cheese, salt fish, and drinks like nothing you have ever seen, anise brandy, Dutch gin, beer on top, quantities that would lay the loft flat, and it lights him up but never once puts him down. And you notice the tick, because there is no not noticing it. There is only the discipline of the face while it happens. You begin without wanting to keep a kind of ledger of it. It is worse when he is tired, worse in the evening than the morning, worse when strangers come, company directors, foreign envoys who have tracked him here, and worst of all 3 or 4 convulsions in an hour, on the days when letters come from Moscow. The courier bags from the east. He tears them open, standing in the yard mud, reads with his jaw working, and the whole left side of him fires and fires, click, click, and men find reasons to be elsewhere. You don't know yet what is in the letters. You will find out with the rest of the world by summer. But it is nearly gone. The tick. You notice this too. And it is the finding of the autumn when his hands are full. An adze, a mallet, a scalding plank, tiller of a boat in a hard wind. Hours can pass without one flicker, as if the storm in him needs an empty sky, and work fills the sky. And once you have seen that, you cannot unsee what it means, and it changes how you look at every prince in every painting for the rest of your life. This man does not build ships although he is a king. He builds ships because somewhere inside something is wrong. Something hurts or storms or shakes, and the adze is the only physic that has ever touched it, and no one in his enormous empire can prescribe it to him. So he crossed the world under a false name to prescribe it to himself. One dusk on the loft floor, walking the chalk lines, he stops beside your sand bucket as if just discovering you there, and looks down from that great height, candle in hand, and asks in his porridge Dutch, without any beginning, "Jan, your father, he has how many sons?" "Two," you say. He speaks to you, teaches you. With his hands, the work he shows you. When I was small, the hemp, the mill. Then he bound me to Master Roger to learn better than he could teach. He nods slowly several times, looking at the candle flame. "Good father," he says. "That is good father." And then, so quietly that you will spend 30 years deciding whether you truly heard it. Mine died. I was small. After, no one shows me nothing. I take everything myself with hands. Everything myself. The flame stands still between you. Then the left cheek wrenches, click, gently this time, almost softly, like something turning over in its sleep, and he straightens and walks the lines again, and you sit by your bucket in the dark of the great loft, 16 years old, guarding the Tsar of Russia from fire, and you think, for the first time in your life, that a man can be the most powerful person in the world, and also an orphan boy showing his dead father a scarf joint, forever, to an empty room, and nobody claps. You do not sleep well that night. Some things once thought stay in the loft with you. Amsterdam itself he devours the way he devours everything, in enormous bites, at a run. And because you are small and silent and know how to carry things, you are taken along more than an apprentice has any right to be. You hold his coat in the anatomy theatre. You will wish some nights that you hadn't been there, and be glad the rest of your life that you were. The great Dr. Ruisch, who can preserve the dead so that they seem only sleeping, who keeps whole cabinets of them, keeps them the way other rich men keep paintings, opens his collection for the tall carpenter, and the tall carpenter is not sickened, not curious in the polite visitor's way. He is ravenous. He must see everything. He must touch. He questions the doctor for hours, how the vessels are filled, how the flesh is kept, what fails first in a drowned man, what a surgeon must know at a battle, and he handles the instruments with those huge, steady when working hands, and Ruisch, who has shown his cabinets to half the crowned heads' envoys of Europe, and watched them go green, watches this one lean closer and closer, and you stand at the wall with the coat over your arm, and understand that you're watching the only student in the room, and the strangest tenderness of all. Before one small preserved child kept so perfectly it seems about to wake, the giant goes quiet, truly quiet, the only stillness you ever see in him indoors, and he stands over it a long time, and what is on his face is not science. He had lost children by then. You learn that later. Little coffins of his own behind him in Moscow. Nobody in the room breathes, and then he straightens, and the cheek fires click, and he asks the doctor what the fluid costs to make, and the world starts again. You wait at the door of print shops and instrument makers while he buys, and buys compasses, quadrants, cases of surgeon's tools he will carry the rest of his life and use on his terrified household, on himself. You trot behind him through the botanical garden while he demands the name of every plant that might grow in Russia. You stand in the gallery of the Amsterdam Theatre built over the water while whales are rendered below, and he leans so far over the rail into the stinking steam that his Russians hold his coat skirts. You see him stop a funeral procession, a common funeral, a carpenter's funeral as it happens, to ask the bearers about the Dutch manner of burial, and the bearers, not knowing him, answer as men do, plainly, and he thanks them plainly, and gives the widow money, far too much money, pressed into her hands so fast she cannot refuse, and is gone around the corner with his little quick steps before she has counted it, and that, you think, trotting after him, is the truest portrait anyone will ever fail to paint. A man fleeing his own kindness like a thief, and twice that autumn you sail with him, and the second time you nearly die, and it is the finest afternoon of your youth. The first time is calm, a trial of a small boat on the E.J. among the anchored Indiamen, and he handles her well, better than well. He was taught by Dutchmen at home on a lake, and it shows, and he is easy. He sings tunelessly, some Russian thing with a swing to it like a saw stroke, and the tick sleeps all afternoon. The second time the company men beg him not to go out. A real blow coming up the I.J. from the west, the water gone grey-green and ragged, spray walking across it in white companies, every sensible keel running for moorings. He stands on the quay with his hat brim hammering against his skull, and that shine coming up in his eyes, and says the wind is exactly why. How else does a man learn what a boat does in wind? And points at you, holding the bailing scoop you'd been told to fetch, and says, the small one comes, he is not afraid. Which is not true. You are terribly afraid. You get in the boat. For 2 hours the world is water. Water in sheets over the bow. Water in your boots. Water flung off the crest straight into your teeth so that you breathe it and cough it and bail it. On your knees in the boat's belly with the scoop going like a machine. Arms burning to the shoulder. Hands dead white and wrinkled and long past cold. And above you against the flying grey sky, the biggest man in Europe stands in a boat you would not stand up in at a mooring, one small foot braced on the weather rail, the tiller alive in one great fist and the sheet in the other, held not cleated, so that the whole force of the gale runs through his 2 arms, and he rides it the way you'd ride an unbroken horse, giving and taking, and he is laughing. That barking laugh snatched away by the wind the instant it leaves him. Green water comes aboard over the lee rail and climbs your thighs, and you are certain, with a clean, cold certainty, that you will drown within sight of the city, and you look up to see whether the Tsar of Russia knows it too, and he looks down at you at that exact moment, soaked black, eyes wild, and roars over the wind the only English words you ever hear him use, learned God knows where, saved for God knows what occasion, and spent on you. Is good, is very good. And the strange thing, the thing you will never be able to explain to your wife or your children or the priest, is that terror obeys him like everything else. It doesn't leave you. It changes masters. You bail. He sails. The boat lives. And when he finally puts her about and runs down for the yard with the storm shoving you home and the walls of Oostenburg come up out of the murk, you find that you are laughing too, snot and salt water and all, laughing like an idiot into the wind, and he sees it and nods once, deeply, as if something has been settled between you. He gives you his own dry coat on the quay. It hangs on you like a tent. It smells of him. Tar, tobacco, brandy, storm. You wear it across the yard with your ears burning while the whole gang watches, and Evert the mask-maker says nothing at supper, but cuts you the crust end of the loaf, which from Evert is a knighthood. That night in the loft you understand something, and it keeps you awake. Out there, with the water trying to kill you both, his face never fired once. Not once in 2 hours. The storm outside had silenced the storm inside. And a boy who has noticed that has noticed something about the man that all the terrified, magnificent people around him, envoys, princesses, generals, have missed, and you did nothing to deserve the knowing except kneel in the bilge and bail. And that is how the truth about great men is distributed in this world, not to the worthy, to whoever happens to be holding the scoop. The talk of the yard in those weeks is full of the things the fine people write about him, because such things leak. Servants read letters, clerks copy them, and gossip runs downhill to lofts like water. You hear that in the summer, on his road west, 2 German princesses, the old Electress Sophia and her daughter, made him stop and dine, would not take no, and that he was so shy at first he covered his face with his hand and could barely speak. The conqueror of Azov, hiding behind his own hand like a farm boy, and that they drew him out. And by midnight he was showing the whole German court how Russians drink, and making the princesses feel his palms, feel the calluses, proud of them. Hear that? Proud. A Tsar showing duchesses his broken hands the way another king would show jewels. And that the old Electress wrote afterward that he was a very extraordinary man, remarkable and quick, and better informed than anyone had told her, but that he could not stop the grimaces of his face, and that it was a great pity, she wrote, a great pity he had not been better taught, for he had, she said, a very good heart. A very good heart. The loft chews on that one for a while in the dark. She saw him one evening, Everett says at last from his corner. You've seen him 3 months, boy. Well, has he? And every head in the straw turns toward you, and you lie there under your blanket with the question sitting on your chest, and you think of the widow with the money crushed into her hands, and the quiet over the sleeping dead child, and the adze thrown into the mud and then cleaned so carefully, like an apology to the steel, and the letters from Moscow that make his face fire and fire, and you say the only true thing you have. He has a good heart the way the IJ has good water. There's a lot of it, and God help you when the wind gets up. Everett laughs so hard he starts coughing, and the loft settles, and outside the rain comes on, and somewhere across the black yard in the company house where he lodges, a candle is probably still burning over a half-drawn ship, because his candle is always the last one in Holland to go out. There are other hours that autumn, quieter ones, and they teach you as much as the loud ones, because a man shows himself most in the time he thinks doesn't count. You learn his Sundays. The yard rests mostly, and the Russians keep their own church in a warehouse room hung with brass-bound pictures of saints, candle smoke and deep chanting that comes through the wall into your loft like the sea into a shell, and he stands through the whole of it, hours, and sings. That is a thing nobody in the gazettes ever mentions and you never forget. The Tsar of Russia in the bass line, loud and true, holding the low notes like ballast, and afterward he comes out into the grey Dutch light with his face washed calm in a way no brandy ever washes it, and the tick sleeps sometimes half a Sunday, and you begin to add a third entry to your ledger of his medicines, work, wind, and singing low in a crowd of voices where, for once, his own voice is just one timber in the hull. You learn his table. He keeps no state at it, and cannot bear to be served slowly, and eats what the gang eats twice as fast. But on Sunday evenings the Russians feast in their quarters, cabbage soup and roast and black bread and endless toasts, and twice you are pulled in, you and 2 other Dutch boys from the gang, hauled onto the benches by Fedka, and the toasts come at you like following seas, to the ship, to Holland, to the company, to your master, to your mothers, and there is no refusing. Refusal is an insult to whatever was just toasted, and the second time you have to be walked back to the loft between Fedka and the wall, and the great bark of his laughter follows you out the door, and Monday at dawn he is at the timber before you, cruel and fresh as morning ice, and looks at your green face and says only, Russian church, Russian table, both need strong legs, and sets you to planing, which is the worst work a boy with your head can be set to, and knows it, and whistles. You learn too what he keeps around him, the strange travelling court of him, grave bearded lords who trail him miserably in Dutch clothes they hate, put off ceremony like men ordered to strip in the street, a priest, a favourite, a quick laughing man with sharp eyes who was a pie seller once, they whisper, a nobody off the Moscow streets, and is now closer to the Tsar's ear than any prince, which tells you more about the whole country of Russia than a shelf of books, that a man can rise there now on nothing but wit and nerve, because the giant is prying the whole society open the way you pry a seam for caulking, and some men will be crushed in the opening, and some will shoot up through it like water. And a dwarf, a small, proud, terrible man in miniature finery who rides on the wagons among the instruments, and the first time you see the two of them side by side, the tallest man in Europe and the smallest man you ever met, deep in what is plainly real conversation, real argument even, the dwarf jabbing a tiny finger up at the great stooped face. You understand something you have no words for at 16 and barely have at 70. That he collected the far ends of everything, giants and dwarfs, storms and calms, the biggest country and the smallest bed, as if only the extremes told him the truth, as if the middle of everything, where the rest of mankind lives comfortably, was to him a kind of fog. And you learn the one thing he could not do, and it is the homeliest thing in the world, and it undoes you a little every time. He could not be idle, not for a quarter hour. Waiting for him was suffering. You saw it whenever a delivery hung fire or a tide had to be sat out. The drumming fingers, the pacing, the jaw, the face beginning to fire, click, click, like a lock rattled by someone shut in. And then he would seize whatever was nearest, rope to splice, a block to strip and grease, wood, always wood if he could get it, and go at it, and the storm would sheer off, and you'd find him an hour later surrounded by mended things, whole and easy, a man let out. And once, waiting on the tide at the basin with nothing to hand, nothing at all, you watched him take out his knife and a scrap of soft pine from his pocket. He kept scraps in his pockets. The Tsar of Russia kept whittling scraps in his pockets the way other men keep coins, and he cut quickly, without looking at it much, a little boat. 2 inches of boat, hollowed, stemmed, sheer line and all, true as an eye could ask. And when the tide served and the boats were called, he stood up and looked at the little thing in his palm as if surprised to find it there, and gave it, off-hand, to the smallest of the rope-walk boys who was always underfoot, and forgot it before it left his hand. The rope-walk boy did not forget it. The rope-walk boy is a grandfather somewhere in Holland tonight, or was, with a 2-inch pine boat in a box, telling people who don't quite believe him. There must be 100 such boxes scattered down the world, you think sometimes. Little wooden proofs. He shed the truth of himself constantly, carelessly, in shavings and small kindnesses and worn tools, into the hands of nobodies, and gave the lie to the painters with every chip that came off his knife, and the world caught the paintings and let the shavings fall, because the world is a poor apprentice and always sweeps the truest part of the day into the fire. You know better. You were taught to save your offcuts. You've been saving them all this while for you, and there are more to come, because October is not done with either of you. The frigate rises through October like bread proving. You have built ships before, watched them go from chalk to keel to a standing forest of frames, but never like this, never with the whole yard bent to one hull, and money no object, and the strangest foreman in Christendom driving the pace. The frames go up and are ribbonded. The whales go on, thick blackened strakes of the best oak in the store, and you are on the gang that fits them. And your particular pride, the thing you will bore your grandchildren with, is a 6-foot length of the larboard sheer strake, forward, that you shaped yourself, spiled, dressed, and hung, with his mark and yours both scratched under the paint where nobody will ever see them, because he came along the staging while you were fitting it, ran his great hand down your work, the whole length, slow, palm flat, the way you'd stroke a horse, feeling for the flat spots, and found none, and took the scriber from behind his ear and scratched his mark, a little pea with a stroke, into the hidden face of the timber, and handed you the scriber and pointed next to it, you, and stood over you while you scratched a clumsy JV into a ship of the Tsar of Russia, your hand sweating so much you could barely hold the steel. Now, he said, she remembers us, and went on down the staging, ducking under the ribbons, leaving you kneeling there with your heart going like a corking mallet. The autumn turns raw, fog every morning off the IJ, thick drowned world fog where sounds come from nowhere, and then wet gales, and then the first hard frosts, and the work does not slow, it quickens, because he wants her in the water before the year dies. Your hands crack open at every knuckle now, the cold weather cracks that split along the old lines and sting all day in the tar. The skin of your palms is so hard you can press a hot treenail end and feel it late, a full second late, like news arriving from another country. You are growing this autumn too, your wrists have come out of your sleeves, and you're always hungry, and the company feeds its crews well. Thick pea soup with pork fat in it, black bread, herring, small beer, and twice, on the great days, when the stem went up and when the last frame was raised, he had brandy sent to the whole gang and drank standing among you, with you, level with the tallest man in the gang, plus a head, and toasted the ship in Russian and Dutch both, and the fog took the cheering and gave it back off the storehouse walls. But there is another weather in him that month, and it is worsening, and its name is Moscow. The courier bags come more often now. You know the look of the days they come, the whole crew knows. He reads standing in the mud, always standing, never seated as if bad news must be taken like a wave, on braced feet, and his jaw works, and the left side of him fires click, 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 and afterward he works with a violence that frightens even Poole the master shipwright, sledging treenails in one blow that want 3, and once splitting a good plank clean along its length and standing over the ruin of it, breathing through his nose while the whole staging held still like mice under a hawk. You hear the words the Russians mutter around their fire and ask one of them, the youngest, a soft-bearded lad called Fedka, who has traded you Russian words for Dutch ones all autumn, tar, bread, plank, girl, and Fedka looks around first and then says the word low, and you carry it back to the loft like a live coal. Streltsy, the old palace soldiers, the musketeers of Moscow, the men with the long beards and the long axes. There has been trouble with them before, Fedka says. There was blood before when the Tsar was a boy. He watched men of his family carried out onto the points of their pikes when he was 10 years old. Jan, 10, he saw it with his eyes. They made him stand on the palace stairs and watch, and Fedka will say no more, and blows on the fire, and you go back across the frozen mud to your loft and lie awake doing the arithmetic that no one in the fine letters seems to do. 10 years old, watching that. And they wonder, the electresses and the ambassadors, delicately in French, where the poor man's convulsions come from. What a pity no one taught him manners. You are 16 and a hemp-beater's son, and you could tell them. The face isn't broken. The face is honest. It's the only honest face in the whole business of kings, that's all. The only royal face in Europe that tells you the truth about what it costs to wear it, and that is exactly why the portraits will have to lie. November comes in on black gales, and in the middle of November comes the day, the 16th. 9 weeks and a day from the laying of the keel, which the old men of the yard keep saying is impossible. 100-foot frigate in 9 weeks, except that they're standing there watching the impossible get tallowed for launching. The Peter and Paul stands finished on the ways, masts not yet in her but hull complete, caulked, painted, her stern carved and gilded, and the whole closed yard has the feeling of a wedding morning. Everyone in their best under their work coats, the smell of fresh tallow on the ways like a great cooking, thick and animal over the tar. He is everywhere that morning, up the ladders, under the hull, checking the daggers and the shores himself, and his face is firing every few minutes. Click, click. But this is the other firing. You know the ledger well enough now to read it. This is too much feeling with nowhere to stand. The same storm that takes him at launchings and christenings and victories all his life. Joy is also weather. And then the company men come, and the flags go up the storehouse poles, and the word runs down the ways, and the last blocks are struck, and for one held breath the great hull sits there, as if deciding, the way they always do, and you are pressed in the crowd of the gang, so close to the ways that you feel it through the ground when she starts. A groan down in the earth, and then the tallow smokes and she goes, gathering way, stern first into the IJ with a rolling roar of dragged cradles and a wall of grey water shoved up and out, and the cheer that goes up is the loudest sound you have ever stood inside, and you are pounding Fedka on the back, and Fedka is pounding you. And above all the heads, over everyone, you can see him, hat off, that small head bare to the sleet, watching his ship take the water, and his face is going like a signal lantern, firing and firing, and he is making no attempt at all, for the first time all autumn, to govern it. Because everyone is shouting and nobody is looking, or so he thinks. You are looking. You are always looking. It is your terrible gift. And you see what the electress didn't, and the ambassadors didn't, and the painters never will. The Tsar of Russia, on the day they gave him his ship, stood in the sleet, with his face convulsing and tears on it, both at once, the storm and the rain together. And then he put his hat back on and became in one motion the tallest carpenter in the yard again, and went down to touch her while she rowed to her lines. The company gave him the frigate, gave, outright, a gift from the city and the company to the Tsar, and within the year she would sail for Archangel round the North Cape with cargo in her belly. And that evening there was a feast for the whole crew in the great store, trestle tables, hams and geese and wheat bread and unlimited beer. And he came down the tables filling cups himself, an emperor pouring for sawyers. And when he came to you he stopped, and the whole table went quiet, and he set down the jug and took your right hand and turned it over, palm up, in front of everyone, and inspected it. The cracks, the scald marks, the black thumbnail, the new callus from the autumn's work, as if reading a letter, and then he showed it down the table, held up your 15-guilder hand in his own like an exhibit, and said, in Dutch, loudly, this is nobility," and barked his laugh and poured your beer till it ran over and moved on, and the table roared, and Evert next to you said quietly into his cup, Remember that, boy, when you hear what else he does in this world. Both things will be true at once. That's the whole trick of him. Both things at once, always. You didn't understand Everett that night. You had had 4 beers. You would understand him for the rest of your life. After the launch, the work changes but does not end. A hull in the water is half a ship. Now come the masts and the rigging and the endless fitting out. And now, too, the other work, because the frigate was never the whole of his business here. All autumn, while he drove treenails, his people were hiring. Officers, pilots, gunners, surgeons, lockmakers, sailmakers, anyone with salt or iron in their trade and hunger in their belly. Hundreds of men signed for Russia, whole boatloads of Holland skill bought up like timber, and crates going east in convoys, tools, instruments, guns, block and tackle, a country being packed for shipping. You help nail some of those crates shut. You do not yet wonder, as you will wonder later, lying awake as an old man, what it means to be a small country whose greatest export that year was the future of a large one. Winter shuts down on Amsterdam like a lid. The canals film over, then bare, and the city puts on skates, all of it, fishwives and burgomasters, and one iron grey afternoon he comes down to the yard basin, where the boys are sliding and demands skates, and gets them. The largest pair findable strapped to those absurd small feet, and goes out onto the ice of the basin at his full height, and falls magnificently, full length, a tower coming down, a fall you feel through the ice in your own knees, and the whole basin freezes in horror. 40 people turn to statues because you do not laugh at the Tsar of Muscovy lying on his back on the ice. He laughs first. Lying flat, staring at the sky, he luffs that huge bark and slaps the ice with his palm like a wrestler conceding, and gets up and falls again and gets up, and by the third fall the basin is laughing with him, at him, openly, boys shrieking, and he chases the boys, terribly on stiff ankles, roaring, and they scatter like sparrows and regroup behind him, and for one grey half-hour on frozen water, the strangest thing you ever saw happens, which is nothing. A big clumsy man learning to skate among children. Nothing at all. The happiest nothing in Europe. By dark he could skate, one afternoon. That is the other thing about him that the portraits could never hold. The speed of the learning, frightening speed. The way he took a skill off you like the ads off your hands that first morning, took it and had it. You saw it with skating and steering and caulking and the naming of plants. The princes of this world are flattered on their quickness by paid men. This one was quick the way fire is quick, and nobody had to lie about it. Sundays that winter you write home. Paper from the yard clerk, a corner of the loft table, your letters slow and round like a schoolboy's, because that's what your writing hand still is, whatever your ad's hand has become. Dear father and mother, I am well. The food is good. I have grown out of the boots. We launched the great ship. I shaped a strake of her with my own hands. The tall carpenter is well. You never write more than that about him. Master Roger's warning sitting on your pen, and it costs you, because he is 9/10 of what you have to tell. I have seen the Tsar of Russia cry at a launching. I have worn his coat. I held the sand bucket while he walked the lines of his ship by candlelight and talked to his dead father. Instead, the tall carpenter is well. Some letters are true and empty at the same time. It is your first lesson in how history gets written. And then, in the black end of January, comes the night of the tar store, and after it nothing is ever the same for you again. It begins with the wind. a dry, hard frost wind out of the northeast that has been scouring the yard for 2 days, the dangerous kind, the kind that makes the fire watch double their rounds, because everything that isn't frozen is tinder. You have the middle watch that night, you and old Everett, lantern round through the sleeping yard, and it is so cold the mud has wrung like iron under your boots for a week, so cold the lantern candle burns small and mean, and you're coming down the lane between the rigging loft and the small tar store, the old one, the wooden one, when Everett stops so suddenly you walk into his back. Smell. Before light, before sound. Smell. And your whole life you will be grateful your nose was raised in Zaandam because you know this smell asleep. Hot pitch. Not day pitch. Not kettle pitch. Pitch hot at midnight in a locked store where no pitch has any business being warm. Then you see the light under the door, soft, orange, breathing. What happened, they decide afterward, was a watch brazier, banked wrong at the end of the day shift, an ember alive in the sweepings, hours of quiet eating, and then the wind finding a gap in the boards. What happens now is that Everett puts his hand flat against the door, snatches it back and says, in a voice you have never heard from him, flat and fast and stripped of all its age, "Belle, run. You run. You have never run like this." The frozen lane, the lantern swinging wild shadows, your boots hammering, and the fire bell rope burns your cracked palms as you haul it, and the sound goes out over the sleeping island, harsh, cracked, enormous, and windows light and doors bang, and men boil out of the lofts with their boots in their hands, and above it all you hear the fire itself find its voice as the store-roof fence, a sound like the steam box but vast, a huffing roar, and the northeast wind takes the first sparks and lays them in a long streaming banner straight toward the rigging loft, toward a 1/4 mile of tarred hemp, toward the storehouses, toward the ships, toward her. The Peter and Paul rides at the fitting-out key 200 paces downwind, masts in her now, rigging half-rove tarred to her trucks, a floating torch waiting for a light. The yard fights the way Dutch yards fight, which is well. Buckets in double lines from the basin holes chopped in the ice, wet sailcloth on the near roofs, axes into the fence between the tar store and the rigging loft to break the fire's road. You are in the bucket line, then on the sailcloth gang, hauling frozen canvas that fights like a live thing up a ladder onto the rigging loft roof, the heat on one side of your face and the frost wind flaying the other, your eyes streaming, sparks coming down the wind like burning snow, stinging dead white hands that feel nothing and will blister tomorrow. And the noise is everything, roar and bell and shouted Dutch and shouted Russian, because the Russians are out too, all of them. And then the shout that runs through both languages at once, the same word in every tongue, and you look down from the roof and see him come. He is half-dressed, shirt, breeches, boots, pulled on bare, no coat in the killing frost, and he does not come to command. He comes the way he came at everything all autumn, straight at it, into it, and what he does first is exactly right, which is the thing about him no story ever gets. He runs the fire's road downwind ahead of the sparks to the frigate, and has her warps cast off and hauls, himself, on the lines with the handful of Russians, walking her on her moorings out along the quay to open water, out of the spark stream, his ship first, his ship always, and then, only then, he comes back up the wind to the fire, and takes the axe from a man too slow to give it, and goes at the fence breach like the wrath of God. You will tell this part badly for 50 years because there is no telling it well. A man 2 meters high, lit orange, swinging an axe two-handed into frozen fencing with sparks streaming around him, breath and smoke pluming, in a shirt in January, the small head bare, and men crowding to him through the burning night. Not because he is the Tsar. Half of them are Dutch, and he is not their Tsar, but because courage is the oldest command there is, and he had more of it about him in a fire than any man you ever saw before or after. The breach goes through, the bucket lines reform along it. The wet canvas holds the rigging loft roof. Your canvas, your gang, you're back up there stamping out sparkfuls with sacking around your boots. And somewhere in the third hour the wind, which set the fire, kills it, backing 2 points and taking the spark stream out over the ice of the IJ, where it dies in the dark like a swarm going home, and the tar store falls into itself with a long sigh and becomes an orange heap, hissing under the buckets, beaten, and that is when it happens. After. Not in the fire. After, when the yard is standing round in the stink and the steam, coughing, counting hands and heads, that strange loose need after time of fires, and you come down the ladder with your sacking smouldering and your face black, and you are looking for Evert, and instead, in the lee of the rigging loft wall, in the dark just outside the ember light, you find the Tsar of Russia on the ground, not fallen, folded, down on one knee and one hip against the wall with his back sliding on the boards, and his face, his whole left side is firing. But not the click, you know, not the half-second storm. This is the other thing, the thing Fedka would never talk about. Seizure after seizure rolling through him like breakers, head wrenching down and down again, shoulder hammering the wall, the huge right hand clawed in the air in front of his own face and his eyes. His eyes are the worst thing you've ever seen, because they are awake in it, aware in it, and they find you. You are alone. It is dark here. Everyone else is at the embers, 30 paces and a world away. His men are scattered on the warps, at the frigate. There is you, 16, with smouldering sacks around your boots, and there is him, the most powerful human being on earth, on the ground with his body being ridden by something no crown can command, and his eyes find you, and you will go to your grave swearing what was in them, and it was not rage, and it was not command. It was the fish market boy. It was, don't let me break my head on the stones. You don't decide. Your body decides, the same animal part that held still that first morning at the timber. You go down on your knees in the frozen mud beside the Tsar of Russia, and you take his head, that small head, in your 2 cracked, scalded, dead-cold hands, and you hold it, firm as holding green oak against the saw, firm as your mother's hands on the fish boy's brow. His neck fights you. The whole convulsion comes up through your wrist like a mooring line surging, unbelievable, frightening strength, and you hold, and you do the only other thing you know, which is what your mother did. You talk low, nonsense, Dutch. It's the wind. It's only the wind. The fire's out. The ship is safe. She's riding clear at the quay. You move to yourself. She's safe. It's the wind. Easy, easy. The word you use for spooked horses. Easy. And it passes. Not at once. In waves. Each smaller. The surges coming further apart under your hands. The neck slowly giving its weight over, until the great body is still against the wall, shuddering only with breath and cold, and his head is heavy, entirely heavy in your hands, and you are eye to eye with him in the dark, closer than you have ever been, close enough to see the ember light in the sweat on his face, and neither of you says one word. Then his hand comes up, the huge hand, and closes around both your wrists at once, one hand around both, and holds them. Hold your hands against his head. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. A grip that stops your blood, and you understand it is not restraint. It is the other thing. It is what he has instead of the word. Then he lets go and you let go, and you look away while the Tsar of Russia gets himself up a wall to his feet, because some things a man must not be seen doing. And by the time you stand up, he is standing at his full height with his face governed and grey, and he looks down at you for a long moment, streaked and soaked and smoking faintly in the frost, and he says, in his porridge Dutch, quite quietly, the longest sentence he ever gives you. The boyars think it is a devil in me. The priests think it is God punishing. The doctors take money and think nothing. A breath, smoking in the cold. It is only weather, Jan. It passes. A man builds in the weather he is given. And then the tick fires once more, a small one, an aftershock click, and he catches your eye on it, and does the thing you would not have believed if all the electresses of Germany had sworn it to you on their Bibles. He smiles at it, at himself. One corner of the governed mouth, going up on purpose this time. You see, he says, it also obeys nobody. And he walks off toward the embers and his men with the quick small steps, shouting for his coat, shouting for hot brandy for every man on the yard, becoming enormous again with every stride, and you stand against the rigging loft wall in the dark with your empty hands still curved to the shape of his head, and that is the moment, you will realise much later, that is the exact moment the portraits died for you. Every portrait, forever. Because you now know what the truest picture of Peter I would have to show, and you know that no painter in Europe would dare, and no Tsar could allow it, and so it will never exist anywhere except behind your eyes. A giant on the ground in the firelight, held together by the hands of a hemp-beater's son saying it is only weather. You're given brandy with the rest. You don't remember drinking it. You remember Evert finding you, looking at you once, an old man's whole face look, and asking nothing at all, and you remember the loft, and the shaking that came on you at last under the blanket, the after-shaking that fires get, and that boys get, and you remember thinking, as you went down into sleep like a stone into the Zaan, nobody will ever believe me. And being, strangely, at peace with that. Some cargo isn't for selling. Some cargo you just carry. The days after the fire have a special quiet, the way days after storms do. The tar store is a black square of frozen slush that the whole yard walks round respectfully like a grave. The burned fence is rebuilt in an afternoon. Your hands come up in blisters exactly where you knew they would, along the heat side, and the blisters break and harden and become part of the general landscape of your palms, one more range of hills. The company holds an inquiry, brief and Dutch, finds the brazier, finds the day watch, doubles the night rounds and moves on, because pitchburns and yards know it, and the ships were saved, and that is the whole story. Except that it isn't, quite. Because something has shifted between you and him, and the whole yard can see the shape of it without knowing its cause. He does not single you out with words. There are no words ever about the wall and the dark. Not once, not that winter, not in any message in all the years after. What there is instead is this. When the gangs are told off each morning, you are in his, always now. When he goes into the city to the instrument makers, to the rope walks, to the wharves, the coat is handed to you to carry without anyone deciding it. When he wants a tool, he says your name before he says the tool. Fedka teaches you more Russian and watches you sideways with a new carefulness, and one evening says, as if remarking on weather, "He counts you among his own now, you know. It is not always lucky to be counted," and will not say more. And once, only once, there is a gift. A morning in early February, grey with coming snow, he calls you to the fitting-out quay where the frigate rides, and takes from inside his coat a folding rule. Boxwood and brass, Dutch work, the best kind, the kind master shipwrights carry, worn already, the brass smooth, the figures gone faint along the first inches from years of a thumb, his thumb, and he puts it in your hands and closes your fingers on it with both of his, the way you close a boy's hands on his first tool, and says, "You measure true, keep measuring true." And that is all. No name day, no reason, no speech. You carry that rule for the rest of your life. You're carrying it in your apron pocket on the day 60 years later when you sit down to be an old man in the sun and let your granddaughter play with the brass hinge, and it still opens sweet, and the faint figures are still faint in the same places, worn by his thumb and then by yours, 2 thumbs, 1 groove, which is, when you think about it, the only portrait of you both that was ever made, and the only honest one. Because now the leaving begins. You feel it before you know it. The way you feel tide turn under a boat. The crates going east double, then treble. The hired men, the hundreds of officers and craftsmen signed for Russia, begin to muster and ship out in companies. The Russians around their fire talk of England, England, because that is where he is going next. The King of England has sent a ship for him, an actual warship for his passage, and there are new docks there to see, and a different way of drawing ships that he has decided the Dutch cannot teach him, the English way, from lines and mathematics rather than the eye and the rule of thumb, and when he speaks of it at the yard table his face lights and fires, the hunger and the storm together, and Poole the master shipwright, who taught him everything a Dutchman's eye can teach, listens with his own face very still, the face of a schoolmaster hearing that the best pupil he ever had is leaving for a rival school and is right to go. The 7th of January by the English count, or the old count, or whichever count. The accounts never agree, and it doesn't matter. A hard, bright morning with ice glitter on every rope in the yard, and the yacht lies at the quay with her pennant snapping, and the Tsar of Russia leaves Amsterdam for England. The whole yard turns out. Work suspended, no order given, none needed. He comes down the line of men the way he came down the feast tables, quickly, hugely, gripping hands, Dutch hands, sawyers and caulkers and smiths' hands, and he grips Evert's and says something that makes the old man bark like a seal, and then he is in front of you, looking down from the whole height of him, and the yard noise goes far away. "Jan Verhoef," he says, "your whole name." He has never used your whole name. Carpenter, you say, because you cannot say anything else, and you were told 3 lifetimes ago in a mould shed in Zeandam never to call him anything else, and it comes out of you now like a vow kept, and the face fires, click, and settles, and something moves in the dark eyes that you will spend your life failing to describe, and he puts his great hand on your shoulder, the weight of it like a ship's timber, and he says, in Dutch, "When Russia builds ships, and Russia will build ships, Jan, more than Holland, more than England, wait and you will hear of it. Remember that a Zaandam boy taught the Tsar how oak speaks, a grip that will leave finger marks, and come east, if the wind ever sets that way. Ask for the carpenter. They will know. Then he has passed you, and up the plank, and the lines come in, and the yacht stands out into the Ajay with the ice glitter all over her, and the yard cheers itself hoarse, and you stand with your cap in your fists watching the tallest thing on the water grow small, which he never did on land, not once. And beside you, Everett blows his nose like a trumpet and says, "Well, there goes the strangest 4 months of your life, boy. Nothing this interesting will ever happen to you again." And Everett, who was right about everything else, is right about that too, and you will be glad of it. Interesting is a heavy cargo. You've carried enough for one boyhood. After that, for a long time, he comes to you only as news, and the news is a schooling all its own in how the world tells stories about a man. From England, through the spring, the letters and gazettes and sailors' talk wash back across the narrow sea, and you gather it the way you gathered gossip in the loft, except now you can weigh every coin of it against the true metal you carry, and some of it rings, and some of it answers dull. They say the King of England gave him a yacht, a beauty, the finest small vessel afloat, and that rings true, and they say he loved the English docks, and the English way of drawing ships above everything Dutch, and that stings all Holland and rings true anyway. They say he went to the theatre and Parliament, or rather refused to go into Parliament, and watched it through a window in the roof instead. The Tsar of Russia on a leads in the rain, peering down at the king, and the lords like a boy looking into a beehive. And oh, that rings like sound oak. You can hear the small head against the glass. And they say, everyone says, laughing, that the fine house he was lodged in at the English Royal Dockyard, a gentleman's house with famous gardens, the pride of its owner, was left a ruin. Floors wrecked, paintings holed, curtains gone, the lawns and the great holly hedges destroyed, because the story goes, and the story's too good not to be true and turns out actually to be true, his company had raced wheelbarrows through the hedges with, some versions insist, the Tsar himself riding in the barrow, and the king's own surveyor was sent to assess the wreckage, and the owner was paid a fortune in damages, and all Europe dined out on it. The barbarian, you see, the savage giant, what can you expect? You hear that one in a Zaandam tavern, home on a visit told big by a bargeman who was never within 100 miles of England, and everyone laughs, and you laugh too because it is funny. And then you walk home along the Black Dyke with the mills thumping, and you find the laugh has gone somewhere and left something else. Because you knew the man who is becoming this story, you held his head in your hands in the dark, and you understand, walking the dyke at 17, something that most people are spared ever understanding, that the world was always going to have to choose about him between two pictures it could bear to keep. The portrait, the calm, broad-shouldered lie in armour, or the joke, the giant wrecking garden with the wheelbarrow, the god or the savage. Because the third picture, the true one, the folded man against the wall saying it is only weather, is unbearable to everyone with a stake in the world staying simple. Kings cannot be that. If kings can be that, then kings are men. And if kings are men, the whole ordering of the earth is a carpenter's chalk line, drawn by hands that shake. You were 16 when you learned the truth about the most famous body in Europe. You're 17 when you learn the harder thing, which is what people do with truths that don't fit. They do not fight them. They simply keep telling the other stories, louder, until the truth stands alone at the edge of the fire like a man nobody introduces, and dies of it politely, and history is the record of the introductions. And then, in the high summer of 98, the news turns black, and the letters from Moscow that made his face fire and fire in the yard mud finally show the world what was in them. The Streltsy have risen. The old musketeers, the beards and the axes, the men who put his family on the pikes when he was 10. 4 regiments marching on Moscow while the Tsar is a continent away racing wheelbarrows through hedges, and the word reaches him in Vienna, where he had gone to see the Emperor, and he turns for home like a slammed door. Gives up the rest of the journey, Venice unseen, everything unseen, and drives east at courier speed, and Europe holds its breath in that delicious, horrified way Europe has, waiting to hear what the giant does. You hear what the giant does through the autumn, in pieces, in gazettes read aloud in taverns, in the talk of Baltic sailors on the Amsterdam quays, and the pieces get worse as they go. The rising was already broken before he arrived, broken by his generals, the ringleaders already hanged. Not enough, not nearly enough for him. The investigations reopen, and the trials that follow, and what is done in the finding out, and the mornings that follow the trials, hundreds upon hundreds of them, gallows by the city gates, and the story that runs everywhere, in every language, impossible to check and impossible to kill, that the Tsar took an axe to the work himself and made his gentlemen do the same. That story you will hear 1,000 times and never learn the truth of, and this is where the tavern goes quiet when it's told, and men look into their beer, and somebody always says, always, "What can you expect? You heard about the garden. You heard about the fits. The man is not right," and every face nods. And you sit there with your beer and Evert's sentence from the launch feast going round in you like a millstone. Both things will be true at once. That's the whole trick of him. Both things at once, always. The hand that closed your fingers on the boxwood rule. The hand on the axe by the city gates. The same hand. You do not get to keep one and refuse the other. That is the price of having stood close, and you understand at last why Fedka said it is not always lucky to be counted, and why your master's voice shook in the mould shed, and what Evert meant about all our lives hanging some day on what the big man learned. You met him in the one season of his life when he was allowed to be only good, because he was only a carpenter. The carpenter went home and picked the crown back up. The crown has an edge on it. It always had. They say he cut the beards off his boyars with his own hands that same autumn, made the great lords of Russia line up and sheared them like sheep, because Europe shaves and Russia would be Europe or it would be nothing. They say a man's beard was his soul's honour there, that men kept the shorn hair to be buried with. He cut them anyway. You think of him standing in the fog thumping timber, sound, shaken. He had put his ear to his whole enormous country, the way you taught him. No, that's vanity. The way he already knew, and heard the deadness in it, the hidden shake that opens one day under strain, at sea, in weather, with lives stacked on top. And he had decided to rip the country open to the heart and cut the shake out, whatever it cost, whoever screamed, and build the hull again from sound wood, and he would spend the rest of his life doing it, and the rest of his life counting the cost in a currency that would have bankrupted any softer man. Cities raised out of swamps on the bones of the workers, a navy conjured out of a nation that had never owned the sea, a war with Sweden that lasted 21 years, a son, his own son, dead in a fortress cell with his father's signature on the process, and you will be an old man before all of that news finishes arriving, and every piece of it will reach you the same way, in a tavern, in a gazette, in a skipper's mouth, and every time under the horror or the wonder, you will feel the same small private ache that nobody around you can feel. You knew the weather that man was building in. You held it in your 2 hands by a burned tar store before any of this was done. but that is all ahead. Slow down. It is still only 1698, and you are still only a boy finishing an apprenticeship, and the years, close up, are not made of history. They are made of work. You go back to Zandam when the Oostenburg contract ends, back to Master Rogger's yard, and the strangest thing about coming home is how unchanged it all is. The green Zan, the thumping mills, the loft, your own dent in the straw, and how changed you are inside it, like a refitted hull in an old berth. You're 18, then 19. You finish your time. You make your proof piece, a boat built with your own hands from keel to gunwale under the master's eyes, and it is past, and you are made journeyman with a drink and a handshake and a psalm, and your father comes to see the boat and runs his hemp-cracked hand down the strake the way another man once did, feeling for flat spots, and finds none, and says nothing, and blows his nose, and that is the second best wages you ever earn. The kissed cottage, meanwhile, has become a church. Not truly, but truly enough. The little wooden house behind the dyke where the Tsar slept, folded in the box bed, is famous now. Pilgrims come, actual travellers out of actual countries, to stoop through the door and touch the bed and buy a beer from whoever owns the place that year, and the neighbours charge for stories, and half the stories are lies, and you could correct them, and you never ever do. You stand at the back of the little room once, 20 years old, listening to a man who never met him describe him to a party of Germans. The giant, the fits, the drinking, the wildness, all the coarse, loud colours, and you look at the box bed, too short by 2 feet for the man who paid good coin to sleep badly in it, because it came with silence, and you think about the hunger in his face over the timber, the hand flat on your strake. Easy, easy. It is only weather, and you put your own coin in the dish and go out into the wind and keep your cargo where it rides best. Stowed, fast, yours. You marry at 22. Greet. A sailmaker's daughter from the next dyke. Quick-tongued, steady-handed, unimpressed by everything on earth except good work, which is why you courted her. You tell her all of it. One winter night, early in the marriage, the whole 4 months, the timber and the storm sail and the launch and the wall by the tar store, all of it, 'cause a marriage where the biggest thing in you is stowed out of sight is a hull with a sealed compartment, and she listens with her mending in her lap and doesn't speak till the end, and then she says the thing you married her for. So the greatest king in the world shakes and works so he won't feel it. A bite of thread. That's most men, Jan. His forge is just bigger, and goes back to the shirt, and you sit there feeling the whole strange glory of your youth being quietly folded and put away in the linen chest of an ordinary Dutch marriage, and finding to your surprise that it fits and keeps better there than anywhere. Children come. A daughter, a son, a daughter. The yard takes your days, the tide takes the yard's ships, the mills thump. The years go over like the long, slow swells of the Outer Bank, each one enormous while you are on it and gone astern before you can name it. And the East keeps its promise. That is the thing you watch across those years, over the rim of your workbench the way other men watch the weather. Russia builds ships. It begins as rumour, becomes news, becomes fact, becomes commonplace. There is a new city, they say, at the far end of the Baltic, in a swamp where the Neva meets the sea, begun from nothing in the year 3, and the Tsar is building it the way he does everything at a run, over every objection, including the objections of the ground itself, which swallows pilings the way the Amsterdam mud swallows them, and he has named it of all things in Dutch fashion almost, Sanct Peter Birch, for his saint, and men who have seen it come through Zaandam and say it is half a shipyard and half a dream. Streets of mud and palaces of timber painted to look like brick, and everyone required by decree to come and live there, boyars weeping as they build their own houses on the bog, and the fleet grows in front of it. Baltic skippers begin to speak of Russian frigates the way, in your boyhood, no one had ever spoken of Russian anything, matter-of-factly, and half the officers' names, when you hear them, are Dutch names, and half the yardmasters' names are Dutch names. Men hired that autumn, some of the men you nailed crates with, gone east on the wind he told you about, the wind that sets that way. It sets for you, too, once. In the year 11 or 12, a recruiting agent works the Zaandam yards, a smooth man with a Russian commission and Amsterdam manners, offering master's wages and passage and privileges to shipwrights who will come to Petersburg. And he hears somewhere, someone talks, they always talk, that Jan Verhoef of the Rogge Yard worked at Oostenburg on the Tsar's own frigate, worked beside the Tsar himself, and the smooth man comes to your bench with his papers and his seals and his figures, and the figures are real, triple your wage, a house, your children schooled, and he says, leaning in, that former acquaintance of His Majesty's person is worth more in Petersburg than gold, that men the Tsar remembers have risen to heights, and you look at the papers a long time. Ask for the carpenter, they will know, and you think about it for 3 days, honestly, hungrily, walking the dike at dusk, and Greet watches you think and says nothing because she fights fair. And on the 3rd evening you find yourself standing across the Zaan from the yard, watching the lanterns come on, listening to the late mallets, and you finally ask yourself the carpenter's question, the only question he ever taught you. Put your ear to it and knock. Is this timber sound, or does it only look fair on the outside? And you listen to yourself and you hear it, the deadness, the little hidden shake. Because what draws you east is not the wages and it is not the work. It is wanting to stand in front of him again and have the dark eyes know you. It is wanting your one great secret to pay out, at last, in the world's coin. And a man who goes 300 leagues to collect on the memory of holding another man's head in the dark has driven his nail crooked, and the joint will weep all his life. You tell the smooth man no. He is astonished, then bored, and moves down the bench. Greet, when you tell her, looks at you one long moment over the children's heads and nods once, the way Evert used to, and serves the soup. Neither of you ever mentions it again. It is the best cut you ever made, and like all your best cuts, it shows nothing, which is how you know. The portrait finds you the way lightning finds a tree on an ordinary day when you are thinking of anything else. Amsterdam, a spring morning, you across on yard business, timber accounts, and you're cutting through the print-sellers' street where the shopmen hang the new sheets in the windows and clip them to lines like washing, maps, sea fights, kings, and you have walked this street 50 times, and this time a face stops you in the middle of it, so the porter curses and shoulders past. It is him. A big engraved sheet, fresh, expensive, after the great painting made in England, the one everybody speaks of, the king's own painter, and there he stands at 3/4 length in armour, polished plate he never wore a day in his life that you ever saw, with an ermine mantle and a fleet behind him on a painted sea, and the face is smooth and full and calm, the eyes level, the mouth composed and faintly pleasant, and the shoulders. You stand in the street and stare at the shoulders. They have given him shoulders. Broad, square, armoured shoulders in perfect proportion to the height, the shoulders of a statue of a Caesar, the shoulders every king is issued at the door of history along with the ermine, and the head sits on them at the right size, the size a sculptor would choose, and the hands, what you can see of the hands are a gentleman's hands, smooth as gloves, and nowhere on the whole sheet, in the whole composed and gleaming man, is there one line, one shadow, one honest engraver's scratch that admits the left side of that face ever moved by itself in its life. You stand there so long the print seller comes out, a neat little man, ink under his nails, pleased with your staring. A fine sheet, he says. Very like, they say. Taken from the life in England, His Majesty sat for it himself. The great Sir Godfrey, you won't find a truer likeness of the Tsar in Europe. Taken from the life, he sat for it. That is the piece you carry away and cannot put down, all the way back on the ferry, all the years after. He was in the room. He sat in a chair in London with his face firing. Click, click. Because sitting still was torture to him, and strangers watching him was worse. Both storms at once for hour after hour, and he watched a man look straight at him, at the narrow shoulders and the small head and the wrenching cheek, and paint the other man instead. The issued man, the armoured man, and he permitted it. He, who bent everything, who cut the beards off his lords' faces because he would not tolerate a false Russia, sat quietly and tolerated a false Peter, approved it, paid for it, sent copies of it to the courts of Europe like a merchant sending samples, and on the ferry home, watching the grey water, you finally understand why, and the understanding is worth more to you than the print cost anybody. It is not vanity. You knew him. Vanity was nowhere in him. He wore the same green coat till it shone and darned his own stockings. It is the same cut he made everywhere, the shipwright's cut. The portrait is not a picture of his body. It is a drawing of the ship. The lines on the loft floor chalked full size of the Russia he was building, and he is the first timber of it, and the first timber must be drawn fair, whatever the tree looked like standing. Countries at war do not send their neighbours honest pictures. They send hulls with no flat spots. The Electress got the evening man, the taverns got the wheelbarrow man, the print got the armoured man, and every one of those was a tool doing work, and the man himself, the folded man, the weather man, was given to nobody at all except by accident, in the dark by a burned tar store to a boy with a sand bucket and a scoop, because the boy happened to be standing where the truth fell, and truth, you now understand, is not published. It is spilled, and whoever it lands on carries it. You never buy the print, but you never again pass a portrait of any king in any window without putting your ear to it, so to speak, and knocking. And they all answer dull, everyone, all your life, and that is his last lesson to you, and the best one. The sound of a shaken timber, once learned, can be heard in pictures too. The great news of those years you hear the way all Holland hears it. In the summer of '9, the battle, the one even the fishwives learn to pronounce. Poltava, deep in the east, where the Swedish king who had beaten everyone for a decade, the boy wonder, the terror of the north, took his invincible army into Russia, and Russia closed over it like the sea. Utterly. An army gone in an afternoon, its king a fugitive over the Turkish border, and Europe stands there blinking at the map, and every chancellery from Madrid to Vienna begins. That summer, the great reappraisal, the one the print sellers can smell before the diplomats can. The giant in the swamp is not a curiosity any more. There is a new great power on the earth, conjured in one working lifetime out of a country Europe used to tell fairy tales about, and its fleet was designed on principles its master learned, holding an adze in Zeeschendam and Deptford, and Evert who died in the year 6, old and cross and right about everything. Evert said it in a loft the first week, all our lives may hang on it some day. Old men in lofts, God speaks through them and pays them nothing. And then, once, at the very last, the wind sets west again, and you see him. 16 and 17, the second journey, 20 years after the first. He comes back, older, the Tsar, past 40 now, Victor of Poltava, Emperor of a coastline, and he comes back to Holland trailing an actual embassy this time. No pretense of Pyotr Mikhailov, though the pretense flickers up in him from habit like the tick itself, and he lodges plainly, and slips his own ceremonies and turns up unannounced in yards and mills and cabinets of curiosities, and one iron grey February morning the word runs down the Zandam Dyke like fire in oakum. He is here. He has come across from Amsterdam, almost alone, on the ice river to see the cottage, the kissed cottage, his own little wooden house behind the dyke. Half the town gets there before he does. The town is faster than it was at this, and you go too. You are 36 years old, a master shipwright with grey coming in at the temples and a boy of your own in the loft where you slept, and you stand in the crowd on the dyke, the same dyke, and the crowd is the same creature it was, murmuring its hungry murmur, and up the path from the water comes a party of tall hats, and above all of them the head. He is heavier. The face is fuller and darker, the moustache gone grizzled, the eyes set deeper, and he walks with the least little hitch now in the quick small steps. But the height is the height, and the shoulders are still the shoulders the portraits refuse, narrow, sloped, driving forward, and when the crowd murmur reaches him, he still does the thing. 20 years and an empire later, still hunches those shoulders up around the small head like a man walking into hail. Some weather is for life. He stoops into the cottage doorway and is inside a long time. Long enough that the crowd starts to shuffle and steam in the cold. What he does in there nobody sees and everybody afterward invents. You don't invent. You stand on the dyke with your hands in your armpits and you know what he's doing in there, roughly, because you know what you will be doing, standing in a 2-room hut that smells of other people's years, looking at a box bed too short for him that once held the only 8 days of his life he ever spent as a man and not an instrument, before the crowds found him even here. 20 years of empire, war, the swamp city, the dead, and the shortest bed he ever slept in is the one he crossed the ice to stand beside. When he comes out, his face is governed and his eyes go over the crowd. Once the old sweep, and this is the part you tell no one for years, not even greet. And when you finally tell her she is silent a long time, the sweep stops. On you. Whether it truly stops, whether a man of 45 with an empire in his head can find in a grey dyke crowd the particular grown face of a boy who held his head in the dark 20 years before, or whether a tall, grey-templed shipwright simply got looked at for a second like everyone else, you will argue with yourself on your deathbed. But you know what you saw. The eyes stopped, the left cheek fired, click, one time, like a word in a language with one speaker and one listener left alive. And the great head made a motion, small, downward, that on any other man you would call a nod. Then the party closed round him and took him down to the ice, and the crowd flowed after, and you stayed on the dyke alone with your heart hammering exactly the way it hammered at 16 with the scriber in your wet hand, and that was the last time on this earth you ever saw Peter the First. From behind, going away down a frozen river, too tall, too narrow, hunched against the eyes of the world, one small quick foot after the other, into the grey. 8 winters later, the bells. January of 25, and the news comes up through the Baltic ports with the first open water, and it is on the exchange and in the gazettes, and in every tavern by the week's end. The Tsar is dead. In his city, in the swamp city, in the winter, of a burst and burning inside him that the surgeons cut for and could not mend. 52 years old, and the stories come with it, as the stories always came with him, and you sought them with your ear the way he taught you. And the one that rings, the one you choose to keep, whether or not the histories will keep it, is this, that in the November before, in the freezing gulf, he saw a boat full of soldiers aground and swamping in the dark, and went into the water himself to his waist, the Emperor of all Russia, hauling men out of the sea with his own hands, and was never warm again after. It may not be true. You have learned what stories are, but you put your ear to it and it rings like sound oak, because you knelt in the bilge of a small boat once while that man laughed at a gale, and you know what he was in water, and if death wanted him it would have known to wait there. You are 44. You go out to the yard early that morning before the men come, and you stand at your bench in the cold with the boxwood rule open in your hands, and you look at the faint worn figures, his thumb, your thumb, one groove, and you find you cannot remember him old and heavy on the ice. What comes instead, unbidden, entire, is fog on the Zaan, and a voice above your head saying wrong, you cut wrong watch, and 2 enormous hands closing over yours, taking the ads away as easily as taking a spoon from a child. The mills thump, the tide works in the piles. You fold the rule and put it away, and pick up your own ads and cut true all day, because that is the only wreath a carpenter knows how to send. The years after that go the way the last years of working men go, which is faster and quieter and closer to the ground. Your hands at 50 begin the long conversation with the weather that old shipwrights' hands hold, aching before rain like the yard's own barometer, the knuckles thickening, the old black splinter under the thumbnail long since grown out and gone, replaced by other marks, a lifetime's ledger written in scar and callous, and you would not trade one entry of it. Your boy finishes his time and makes his proof boat and passes, and stands there while your own father's ghost blows its nose in you, and you run your hand down his strake, palm flat, slow, feeling for flat spots, and find none, and say nothing, because that is how it is said. Greet's hair goes white, and her tongue does not. The yard passes to younger backs. You keep a bench in it, the way old masters do, and the young men bring you the awkward questions, the shaken timber, the joint that won't close, and you put your ear to their problems and knock, and mostly you can still hear the answer, and on the days you can't, you say so, which the young men tell each other is the strangest thing about you. An old man who says I don't know, and you think, I learned it from a man who crossed Europe under a false name to say it. I don't know. Show me. The rarest words in the mouths of the great, and the beginning of everything they call his greatness, and nobody puts them under the portraits, because the portraits keep coming. That is the thing about the end of a great man's life. The pictures breed. He is everywhere now, in the print windows, in the books, on medals. The Emperor, Peter the Great, they call him in every language, and every year the pictures agree with each other a little more and with your eyes a little less. The shoulders broaden decade by decade. The head grows to fit them. The face stills and stills until it has the composure of church stone. There is a great bronze of him coming, they say, in his city, a rider on a rearing horse on a cliff of granite, and it will be magnificent, and the horse will be doing what he could never make his own body do, which is stand perfectly, monumentally, forever still. And sometimes, in your last working years, a traveller or a bookish young man hearing the old story that this grey master here worked at Oestenburg in 97, worked on the Tsar's own frigate, beside the Tsar's own person, will come to your bench with a print or a book plate and hold it out and ask the question they all ask, eager, already knowing the answer they want. Is it like him? Is that what he was like? And you learn over the years what to say, and it is a carpenter's answer, and it is the truest sentence you own. It's a good drawing of the ship, you say. I knew the tree. Some of them understand. Most look politely baffled and go away with their print, and that is right too. The world needs the drawing. Ships are built from drawings. You have no quarrel with drawings. You only know, as the man who stood in the fog while the tree was still standing, what the drawing had to leave out to become useful. The narrowness, the smallness, the shake, the sweat, the storm, the hand around your wrists in the dark, the whole cargo of him that would not fit in the hull of any picture and had to be jettisoned so the image could sail. Everything that made him a man went over the side so that the emperor could float. That is not a crime. That is shipbuilding. But somebody who watched the loading should say, at least once before he dies, what was thrown overboard, and to whom. So you say it. Once. At the very end, and not to a scholar and not to a print seller, but to a girl of 9 with her grandmother's tongue and her grandfather's hands. It is a summer evening in the year you turned 73, and you are in the chair by the door in the low sun because that is your bench now, and your granddaughter, Greetja, little Greet, is playing with a boxwood rule, which she's allowed to do and knows it is an honour, opening and shutting the sweet old hinge, and she reads the maker's mark and the faint figures with her quick eyes and asks, the way children ask, straight through the middle of everything, Groot Vader, whose thumb wore this? It wasn't yours. Your wear is here. And she puts her small finger precisely on the second groove, beside the first, and you look at her a long moment in the low sun. This child who can read wear, God help her, she'll be at a bench all her life or married to one, and you decide that the wind has finally set that way. And you tell her, all of it. The evening goes long and the swallows come out over the Zaan, and you tell her the fog and the timber that speaks, the crowds on the dike and the boys with the green apples, the loft floor and the candle, the storm on the IJ and is good, is very good, the launch and the tears and the convulsing face all at once, the sleet, the feast. This is nobility. And then, last, because it must be told last, the night of the tar store, the smell before the light, the bell rope burning your palms, the axe in the ember light, and the wall, and the dark, and the head of the Tsar of all Russia held in these two hands. These ones, look, and it is only weather, Jan. It passes. A man builds in the weather he is given. She does not fidget once. At the end she's quiet for a while, turning the rule over, and then she asks the only question left, the one the whole world never thought to ask, and it takes a child of 9. Did it ever stop hurting him? And you look out at the water going gold, and you give her the truth, because she has earned it, and because you are too old to give anything else. No, you say. I don't think it ever did. I think he built an empire the way a man whistles past a graveyard, louder the darker it gets. I think every ship he ever launched was him proving to a dead father that he'd learned the joint. And I think, wherever he is, If there's timber there, he's asking somebody to show him something. The rule clicks shut in her small hands. The portraits will tell you he was a god, child, and the taverns will tell you he was a monster. And here is what your Grootvader will tell you instead, and you keep it, because in all the world it may be down to just us now. He was a man, too tall, too narrow, shaking, hungry, kind and terrible in the same hour, with something broken in him that never mended and never once stopped him. That's not a god, and it's not a monster. That's just the most man I ever met. And the pictures lied because the truth was bigger than the frame, not smaller. Remember it that way round. Everyone else remembers it the other way. She keeps the rule. You see to that before the end. And whether she kept the rest, whether any of it survived her, whether some thread of it is what you're hearing tonight, 3 centuries down the dark, well, stories are like treenails. You drive them true, and then they're out of your hands, and God sees them anyway. The evening you die is an ordinary one, which is the mercy working men pray for and rarely get. You get it. A bench in the sun, the mills thumping, the tide in the piles, and somewhere over the water a mallet going, one late mallet, some apprentice finishing a cut before dark, out of rhythm with your slowing heart, and then, gently, not. And now let it all go quiet, because this is the part of the night where we stop watching and start drifting. Centuries will pass. The Zandam you knew will change beyond recognition. The 50 yards will dwindle and close. The thumping mills will fall silent one by one, until the last few stand as curiosities, painted and preserved, and the green Zaan will run quieter than it has run since before your grandfather's grandfather. The forests of masts at Amsterdam will vanish, and iron will replace oak, and steam will replace wind, and the whole ancient craft in your hands, the speaking timber, the ear against the grain, will pass out of the world's need and into its memory. But the little wooden cottage behind the dike will still be standing. That is the joke history saved for last, and it is a good one. The palaces he built will burn and flood and be rebuilt in stone and gilded and toured. The swamp city will grow into one of the great cities of the earth and carry his name, lose it, and take it back. The bronze rider will rear on its granite wave through revolutions that pull down every other emperor around it. And through all of it, in Zandam, propped and sheltered now, a stone casing built around it like a reliquary. The 2-room hut with the box bed too short for him will simply go on standing where it stood, and people will still come from actual countries to stoop through the low door and stand in the smell of old timber and be quietly astonished. And the truest relic in all the world of the man who owned 1/6 of the earth will remain a bed he didn't fit. Some things don't change. The tallness of some people's lives and the narrowness of what must carry it, that doesn't change. The distance between the portrait and the person, that doesn't change. Every age paints the shoulders broader than they were on its emperors and now on everyone, and every age needs the few who knew the tree. The weather inside people doesn't change. The storms that fire and pass and fire again, and the old medicine for it doesn't change either. Work for the hands, wind on the water, and one other person somewhere, sometime, who saw the worst of it up close and did not look away and held on and said easy, easy, and never told it as gossip and never sold it and carried it instead all the way down their life like sound cargo. And the need, at the end of a long day, to lay all of it down, that doesn't change at all. So lay it down now. You've been carrying a whole century tonight. The ads and the fog, The crowds on the dyke, the candle on the loft floor, the gale and the bailing scoop, the fire bell and the wall in the dark and the weight of an emperor's head in a boy's cracked hands. Set it all down, piece by piece, the way tools go back on the rack at the end of the shift, each to its place, the steel wiped, the edges safe, the door of the shed swinging to. Let the mallets go quiet 1 yard at a time across the water. Let the tide take over, working in the piles under everything, patient, regular, the oldest rhythm there is, the one that was rocking ships before emperors and will be rocking them after. Let your hands go loose. They've done enough. Whatever they built today, it's built. Whatever they got wrong, the morning will forgive. The wood keeps no grudges, and neither tonight should you. Let your breath come the way the swells came on the outer bank, long and slow, and each one a little further apart, each one carrying a little less. You're warm enough. You're moored well enough. The watch is set, and it isn't yours. Somewhere the fog is coming in off a green river, and the timber is stacked and waiting, and everything that needs to be measured tomorrow will still be there tomorrow, and it will measure true, because you measure true. The lantern's down the far end of the yard now, growing smaller. Someone tall is carrying it away, walking quickly, on small quiet feet, and you don't need to follow. The last mallet stops. The water works in the piles. It's only weather. It passes. Sleep now. Good night.